What if I told you that the largest empire in human history was built without taxing its own people? No income tax, no property tax, no sales tax, nothing. While modern governments take 30, 40, even 50% of everything you earn, Genghis Khan conquered a quarter of the world and never asked his own citizens for a single coin. This is not a legend. This is not a myth. This is the hidden economic genius of a man history remembers only for blood and conquest. But beneath the armies and the terror was a financial system so sophisticated, so counterintuitive, that modern economists are still trying to understand it. The Mongol Empire was not just a military machine. It was an economic revolution. And if you understand how it worked, you will never look at taxes, trade, or government the same way again. This is the financial historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Let me start with a question that should disturb you. Why do you pay taxes? The answer seems obvious. Roads, schools, hospitals, defense. The government needs money to function. But here is the uncomfortable truth. For most of human history, governments did not tax their own people. Taxation of citizens is a relatively modern invention. Ancient empires, medieval kingdoms, and even early modern states relied on conquest, tribute, and trade. The idea that a government should reach into the pockets of its own citizens every year, every month, every paycheck would have seemed absurd to most rulers throughout history. And no one understood this better than Genghis Khan. Born around 1162 on the harsh steppes of Mongolia, the man who would become Genghis Khan started with nothing. His father was poisoned by rivals. His family was abandoned by their tribe. As a child, he was a refugee, a survivor, a nobody. By the time he died in 1227, he ruled an empire stretching from Korea to Poland, from Siberia to Persia. More territory than Rome at its height, more land than Alexander ever dreamed of. But here is what the history books rarely tell you. Genghis Khan was not just a conqueror, he was a financial architect. And the system he built was fundamentally different from anything the world had seen before. The first principle of Mongol economics was radical simplicity. Mongols did not pay taxes, period. If you were born Mongol, if you were part of the empire's core population, the state asked nothing from you financially. No tribute, no levies, no forced contributions. This was not because the Mongols were too primitive to understand taxation. It was a deliberate policy, a social contract between the Khan and his people. In exchange for absolute loyalty and military service when called, Mongols lived tax-free. Every able-bodied man was expected to fight when summoned. But between campaigns, they kept everything they earned, everything they herded, everything they owned. Compare this to your life today. How many hours do you work each week just to pay taxes? How much of your income disappears before you even see it? The average American works until mid-April just to cover their tax burden. In some European countries, citizens work until June before they earn a single dollar for themselves. Genghis Khan looked at this model and rejected it entirely. His logic was brutally practical. Why weaken your own people by taking their wealth? Why create resentment and resistance among the very population you depend on for soldiers? Instead, he found another source of revenue: everyone else. The Mongol Empire was funded not by internal taxation, but by external extraction. Conquest was the business model. When the Mongols swept across Asia and into Europe, they did not simply destroy, they calculated. Cities that surrendered peacefully were spared and incorporated into the empire. They paid tribute, yes, but they were allowed to continue their commerce, their crafts, their lives. Cities that resisted were annihilated, not out of cruelty for its own sake, but as a calculated message. Resistance is expensive, submission is profitable. This was economic warfare in its purest form. The terror was not random, it was strategic. Stories of Mongol brutality spread faster than the armies themselves. By the time the horsemen arrived at a new city, the population had already heard what happened to those who fought back. Many simply opened their gates. The cost of conquest dropped dramatically when fear did the work of swords. But here is where the genius becomes clear. The Mongols did not just take, they invested. Once a territory was conquered, it was integrated into the largest free trade zone the world had ever seen. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, created conditions for commerce that had never existed before. Before the Mongols, the Silk Road was a myth as much as a reality. Yes, goods traveled from China to Rome, but the journey was fragmented, dangerous, and expensive. Merchants faced dozens of borders, each with its own taxes, its own tolls, its own bandits. A shipment of silk might pass through 20 different hands, each taking a cut before reaching its destination. The Mongols changed everything. Under Mongol rule, a single passport could take you from Beijing to Budapest. A merchant could travel thousands of miles under the protection of the Khan. Bandits were hunted down and executed. Local rulers who interfered with trade were removed. The Mongols understood something that many modern governments still struggle with. Trade creates more wealth than taxation ever can. Think about this for a moment. Every tax is a friction. Every tariff is a barrier. Every regulation is a cost. The more obstacles you place in the path of commerce, the less commerce happens. The Mongols stripped away those obstacles with systematic brutality. They did not care about local customs or traditional privileges. They cared about goods moving, money flowing, and their cut of the profits. And their cut was substantial. The Mongols took tribute from conquered peoples. They imposed customs duties at key trading posts. They taxed foreign merchants passing through their territory. But they never touched their own. The burden fell entirely on outsiders. The second pillar of Mongol financial genius was the Ortaq system. This was a partnership model between the Mongol elite and merchant networks, primarily Muslim traders from Central Asia. The Mongols provided capital and protection. The merchants provided expertise and connections. Profits were split. This was not charity. This was venture capitalism 700 years before Silicon Valley. The Mongol aristocracy invested their war plunder into trading expeditions. Caravans carried silk, spices, precious metals, and slaves across the empire. The returns were extraordinary. And because the merchants operated under imperial protection, the risks were minimal. The Ortaq traders became fabulously wealthy. So did their Mongol partners. The system created a class of super-rich investors who had every incentive to support Mongol rule. As long as the empire was strong, their profits were secure. The alignment of interests was perfect. Compare this to modern government relationships with business. Today, governments tax corporations, regulate them, sue them, and constantly threaten them with new restrictions. The relationship is adversarial. Businesses try to minimize what they give to the state. States try to extract as much as possible. Both sides lose energy fighting each other. The Mongols created a partnership. The state and commerce were not enemies. They were allies with shared interests. And the result was an explosion of wealth that transformed Eurasia. But the Mongol financial innovations did not stop there. In China, under Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson, the empire introduced something that would change the world forever: paper money. The Chinese had experimented with paper currency before, but the Mongols took it to an entirely new level. They created a unified monetary system across the largest empire in history. The Chow, as the Mongol paper money was called, was backed by the full authority of the Khan. It was accepted from the Pacific coast to the edges of Europe. For the first time, a single currency facilitated trade across an entire continent. Marco Polo, the Venetian traveler who spent years in Kublai Khan's court, was astonished. In Europe, money meant gold and silver, heavy, limited, difficult to transport. In Mongolia, money was paper, light, abundant, and incredibly efficient. Polo wrote that the Khan could buy anything in his realm with these printed notes. To European ears, it sounded like magic. It sounded like fraud. It sounded impossible. But it worked. The Mongol paper currency functioned because it was backed by something more powerful than gold. It was backed by fear and trust. Fear of what happened to those who refused it. Trust that the empire was eternal and its promises were good. Sound familiar? Every modern currency operates on exactly the same principle. The dollar in your pocket is not backed by gold. It is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Faith and credit, trust and power. The Mongols understood this 7 centuries ago. Now here's the uncomfortable truth that modern governments do not want you to understand. The Mongol model proves that taxation is a choice, not a necessity. An empire can be funded through trade, through conquest, through partnerships with commerce. The decision to tax citizens, to reach into their pockets year after year, is a political choice, not an economic inevitability. Of course, the Mongol system had a dark side. The wealth came from conquest. The peace was maintained through terror. Entire cities were erased to make a point. Millions died so that trade could flow freely. This is not a model anyone would want to revive in its entirety. But the financial principles remain valid. Trade creates more wealth than taxation. Partnerships with commerce are more effective than adversarial relationships. And the burden of government can be placed on outsiders rather than on citizens. Every modern government has chosen a different path. They tax their own people relentlessly. They regulate commerce into submission. They create adversarial relationships with the businesses that create wealth. And then they wonder why economic growth stagnates, why citizens feel squeezed, why trust in government collapses. The Mongols would have laughed. Why strangle the goose that lays the golden eggs? Why take from your own people when there is a world full of others to tap? Let me tell you what happened when the Mongol system collapsed. The empire fragmented in the 14th century. The successor states abandoned the old principles. They began taxing their own populations. They restricted trade. They fought among themselves. Within a few generations, the wealth that the Mongols had created evaporated. The Silk Road, which had flourished under Mongol protection, withered. Merchants faced new borders, new taxes, new dangers. The flow of goods slowed to a trickle. Cities that had grown rich on trade fell into poverty. The economic miracle ended because the political system that sustained it was gone. This is the lesson that echoes through history. Economic prosperity is not natural. It is not automatic. It depends on political structures that protect commerce and limit extraction. When those structures collapse, wealth collapses with them. And here is the part that should worry you. The modern global trading system is showing cracks. Tariffs are rising. Borders are hardening. Governments are increasingly hostile to international commerce. The language of protection and nationalism is replacing the language of free trade. We may be living through the early stages of a new fragmentation, and if history is any guide, the consequences will be severe. So, what can you learn from Genghis Khan? First, understand that taxation is not the only way to fund a government. It is simply the way that modern states have chosen. That choice comes with costs. Every tax discourages work, discourages saving, discourages investment. The Mongols found other ways. Modern governments could too, if they had the will. Second, understand that trade creates wealth faster than any other human activity. The Mongols knew this instinctively. They protected trade routes, standardized currencies, and eliminated barriers. They profited not by restricting commerce, but by enabling it. Every modern restriction on trade, every tariff, every regulation, is a step backward toward poverty. Third, understand that the relationship between government and commerce matters enormously. When the state treats business as a partner, both prosper. When the state treats business as an enemy to be exploited, both suffer. The Ortaq system created alignment. Modern tax systems create conflict. The results speak for themselves. Fourth, and most importantly, understand that all systems are temporary. The Mongol Empire seemed invincible. It collapsed. The Roman Empire seemed eternal. It fell. The British Empire ruled a quarter of the world. It is gone. Every system, no matter how powerful, eventually fails. The only protection is knowledge, awareness, and the ability to adapt when the ground shifts beneath your feet. The financial genius of Genghis Khan has been buried under centuries of propaganda. We remember the blood. We forget the brilliance. We learn about the massacres. We ignore the economic revolution. But the truth is there for anyone willing to look. A man born with nothing built the largest empire in history. He did it not just with swords, but with systems. He created a world where his own people lived tax-free while conquered nations funded the machine. He turned terror into a business tool and trade into an engine of wealth. He introduced paper money to half the planet. He built partnerships between state and commerce that generated fortunes. And then it all collapsed. Because no system lasts forever. Because the principles that built it were abandoned by those who inherited it. Because human greed and stupidity eventually destroy everything. That is the final lesson. You are living inside a system right now. A system that taxes you relentlessly, that restricts your commerce, that treats you as a resource to be extracted rather than a citizen to be served. This system seems permanent. It seems inevitable. It seems like the only way things can work. But history proves otherwise. There have been other systems. There will be other systems again. The question is whether you will recognize the change when it comes, whether you will be prepared, whether you will survive and thrive while others are crushed by the weight of their assumptions. Genghis Khan understood something that modern economists still struggle to admit. The way we do things now is not the only way. It is not even the best way. It is simply the way that those in power have chosen because it benefits them. History does not repeat exactly, but if you do not understand it, it will crush you all the same. The patterns are there. The lessons are written in blood and gold across the centuries. The only question is whether you will read them. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I will show you where to look.